The wind screamed across Mirror Lake like something alive and furious, carrying sheets of snow that turned the world into a white void. The temperature had plummeted to 15 below zero, the kind of cold that burned exposed skin in seconds and turned breath to ice crystals before they hit the ground. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, 34, couldn't feel her hands anymore. The zip ties bit deep into her wrists, cutting off circulation, while her two K9 partners, Atlas, an 85-pound Belgian Malinois, and Luna, a 75-pound German Shepherd, struggled beside her in the back of the van. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Both dogs were muzzled and bound, their frightened whimpers cutting through Sarah's heart worse than the cold ever could. She'd been a Colorado State police officer for 12 years, the last 6 with the K9 unit. Atlas specialized in explosive detection and tactical assault. Luna was trained for search and rescue, her nose capable of finding victims buried under 10 feet of avalanche snow. Together, the three of them had saved 47 lives. Now someone wanted to make sure they'd never save another. The van lurched to a stop. Sarah's head cracked against the metal wall, stars exploding across her vision. Through the gap in the partition, she caught a glimpse of the frozen lake stretching endlessly into the storm. "End of the line, Lieutenant," came a voice she recognized with sickening clarity. Captain Marcus Webb stepped into view. 52 years old, decorated officer, mentor to half the department. The man who'd pinned her badge on 6 years ago. His face showed no emotion as he yanked open the van's rear doors, letting the brutal wind sweep inside. "You shouldn't have looked at those files, Sarah," he said almost sadly. "The cartel pays better than the state ever will. You could have just minded your business." Sarah's lips were too numb to form words, but her eyes burned with defiance. Atlas growled deep in his chest despite the muzzle, his amber eyes locked on Webb with pure hatred. Webb gestured to two men in tactical gear, dirty cops, Sarah realized, recognizing the patches. Officers she'd worked alongside, men she'd trusted with her life. "Get them on the ice." Webb ordered, "Make it look like they fell through during a rescue attempt. Happens all the time in weather like this." Strong hands dragged Sarah from the van. Her legs wouldn't support her weight. Hypothermia was setting in, her body shutting down systems to preserve her core temperature. Atlas and Luna were hauled out next, the dogs thrashing wildly despite their restraints. The surface of Mirror Lake stretched before them, a gray-white expanse broken by patches of darker ice where the water beneath was too restless to freeze completely. Death traps waiting to swallow anything that ventured over them. They dragged Sarah 50 yards onto the ice. She could hear it groaning beneath them, a deep, resonant sound like the lake itself was protesting. Atlas and Luna were forced down beside her, all three, positioned over one of the darker patches. Webb crouched in front of Sarah, his breath fogging the air. "Nothing personal, Lieutenant, just business." He stood, nodded to his men. They raised their weapons not to shoot, but to use as clubs. The first blow shattered the ice beside Sarah's head. The second opened a crack that spider-webbed outward. The third broke through completely. Black water surged up through the hole, impossibly cold, filled with chunks of ice like broken teeth. The men worked methodically, enlarging the opening until it was wide enough to swallow all three of them. "Any last words?" Webb asked. Sarah found her voice, hoarse and cracking. "Yeah, you're going to burn in hell." Webb smiled coldly. "Maybe, but not today." He nodded. His men kicked Sarah into the hole. She plunged into water so cold it felt like acid, every nerve in her body screaming. The shock forced what little air she had from her lungs. She sank, the darkness absolute, the cold crushing. Above her, she heard the muffled splashes as Atlas and Luna were thrown in after her. The zip ties made it impossible to swim. Sarah twisted desperately, trying to find the hole, but the current under the ice was deceptive. The water pulled her sideways, away from the opening. Her lungs burned. Her vision started to go gray at the edges. "This is how I die," she thought with strange clarity. Drowned under ice by men I trusted. Then something grabbed her jacket. Strong jaws, pulling with desperate strength. Luna, the German Shepherd's search and rescue training, had taught her to grab and drag, even in water. Even bound and muzzled, some instincts ran too deep to suppress. Luna pulled Sarah back toward the faint patch of lighter darkness that marked the hole. Sarah's head broke the surface and she gasped, sucking in air that hurt like knives. But the men were still there, standing over the hole. Persistent, Webb said. He raised his boot to push her back under. The gunshot cracked across the frozen lake like the hand of God. Webb stumbled backward, a red bloom spreading across his shoulder. His men scattered, diving for cover, weapons raised. "Who the hell?" one of them started to shout. Another shot, this one so precise it took the gun from the man's hand without touching his fingers. Through the swirling snow, a figure emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the controlled economy of a man who'd spent years perfecting the art of lethal efficiency. He wore Arctic camo and carried a rifle that looked like an extension of his body. Commander Jake Reaper Morrison, Navy SEAL Team 6, had been on leave at his family's cabin 3 miles up the mountain when he'd heard something that shouldn't exist in a blizzard. Dogs barking in distress, the sound carrying on the wind in a pattern that triggered every combat instinct he'd honed over 15 years of operations. He'd grabbed his gear and moved toward the sound, arriving at the lake just in time to see 3 figures, pushed through the ice. Now he advanced across the frozen surface with controlled aggression, his weapon tracking targets with mechanical precision. "Federal officer," he barked, the lie coming smooth and automatic. "On the ground, now." Webb's remaining men hesitated. Jake put a round through the ice 6 inches from the nearest one's foot. "I don't miss twice," Jake said quietly. They dropped their weapons and hit the ice face first. Jake didn't waste time securing them. He sprinted to the hole where Sarah was clinging to the edge, her lips blue, eyes glazed with hypothermia. Luna was beside her, paddling weakly. Atlas surfaced a moment later, the Malinois' strength nearly spent. "Hold on," Jake said, dropping to his belly to distribute his weight. He reached into the water, grabbing Sarah's jacket. The cold bit into his hands, even through gloves. He pulled, muscles straining, dragging her onto solid ice. She wasn't breathing. Jake rolled her onto her back, checked her airway, and started CPR. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The wind howled around them like it wanted to steal whatever warmth he was trying to restore. "Come on," he muttered between compressions. "Don't you quit on me." Sarah's chest hitched. She coughed, water spilling from her mouth, then sucked in a desperate breath. "That's it," Jake said. "Stay with me." He turned his attention to the dogs. Luna had crawled partially onto the ice, but Atlas was still in the water, his head barely above the surface. Jake reached in, grabbed the dog's tactical harness, and hauled the 85 pounds of muscle and determination onto the ice. Both K9s were shaking violently, hypothermia setting in fast. Jake pulled out his emergency thermal blankets, wrapping Sarah first, then the dogs. He cut their restraints with his combat knife, the blade slicing through zip ties and muzzles like they were paper. Atlas immediately tried to stand, positioning himself between Jake and Sarah, despite his exhaustion. Luna pressed against Sarah's side, trying to share what little body heat she had left. "Easy, boy," Jake said softly to Atlas. "I'm one of the good guys." The Malinois' growl said he'd reserve judgment on that. Behind them, Webb was crawling across the ice, leaving a blood trail, reaching for a weapon one of his men had dropped. Jake didn't even look back. He simply drew his sidearm and put a round through the ice, 3 inches from Webb's hand. "Next one won't miss," Jake said calmly. Webb froze. Jake activated his emergency beacon, the signal strong enough to reach the county sheriff's station 15 miles away. Then he gathered Sarah in his arms. She was a small woman, maybe 5 to 6, 130 pounds, soaking wet, and started the careful journey back to shore. "Atlas, Luna," he said firmly. "Heel." The dogs responded to the command voice instinctively, falling into step beside him despite their exhaustion. Jake moved steadily, testing each step, redistributing weight, when he felt the ice flex beneath him. It took 20 minutes to reach the shore. By then, Sarah was semi-conscious, mumbling incoherently about files and cartels and men she'd trusted. Jake carried her to his truck, cranked the heat to maximum, and positioned her and the dogs in front of the vents. Only then did he go back for Webb and his men, securing them with their own zip ties and dragging them away from the hole in the ice. Let them freeze a little. They'd earned it. The first sheriff's cruiser arrived 30 minutes later, lights cutting through the storm. Jake stood beside his truck, rifle across his chest, looking every inch the warrior he was. Deputy Frank Knowles stepped out, hand on his sidearm, taking in the scene with wide eyes. "What the hell happened here?" "That woman in my truck is Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Colorado State Police," Jake said. "Those men tried to murder her and her K9s by throwing them through the ice. I happened to be in the area." "Happened to be?" Frank repeated skeptically. Jake's smile held no warmth. "God works in mysterious ways, Deputy. I suggest you call your sheriff and tell him he's got dirty cops to deal with. Also call an ambulance. The lieutenant and her dogs need immediate medical attention." Frank looked at the bound men, at Webb bleeding into the snow, then back at Jake. "Who the hell are you?" "Nobody important," Jake said. "Just a SEAL who heard barking." In the truck, Sarah's eyes fluttered open. Through the fogged window, she saw a silhouette against the storm, broad-shouldered, still, watchful. Atlas and Luna were pressed against her, their warmth slowly bringing feeling back to her frozen limbs. She didn't know who he was. Not yet. But somewhere in the haze of hypothermia and shock, she understood one absolute truth: that man had just declared war on whoever wanted her dead. And she had a feeling they were going to regret ever throwing her into that frozen lake. The storm raged on, but inside the truck, life was returning. 3 heartbeats that should have stopped were still beating. And in the darkness, a SEAL stood guard, waiting for the next move in a game that had just turned very, very deadly. Sarah Chen woke to the rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors and the antiseptic smell of sterilized air. Her throat felt like sandpaper, her muscles screamed with every small movement, but she was alive. That alone felt like a miracle. She turned her head slowly, fighting the wave of dizziness. The hospital room was private, curtains drawn, one chair positioned near the window. In it sat the man who'd pulled her from the ice. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe late 30s, with close-cropped dark hair streaked with premature gray at the temples. His eyes were storm-cloud gray, the kind that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. He wore civilian clothes, now jeans, a dark Henley, boots, but carried himself with a coiled readiness that screamed military. "Atlas and Luna?" Sarah's voice came out as a rasp. "Veterinary ICU, 2 floors down," the man answered immediately. "Hypothermia, some frostbite on their paws, but they're fighters. Vet says they'll make full recoveries." Relief flooded through Sarah so intensely she felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We need to talk about why someone wanted you dead." Sarah studied him more carefully. "You're not just a SEAL, are you?" A faint smile. "Commander Jake Morrison. Recently retired from Team 6. I was on leave at my family's cabin when I heard your dogs barking. 3 miles away in a blizzard. I've got good ears. And military working dogs have a specific distress bark. Once you've heard it in combat, you don't forget." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Captain Webb is in custody. So are his 2 men. But before the county sheriff could question them, someone posted their bail, all 3 of them, $500,000 each." Sarah's blood went cold. "That's not possible. They tried to murder a police officer." "Apparently, they have friends with very deep pockets. Friends who made the problem disappear fast." Jake's eyes hardened. "So I'll ask again. Why did they want you dead?" Sarah closed her eyes, the memory rushing back. 3 weeks ago, I was investigating a series of warehouse fires in Jefferson County. Looked like insurance fraud. But Atlas hit on explosives residue at one of the scene's military-grade C4, not the kind you get from hardware stores. "You reported it?" to Captain Webb. He said he'd handle it, pass it up the chain. She opened her eyes. But then I started noticing things. Webb meeting with people he shouldn't know. Cash deposits in his account that didn't match his salary. So I dug deeper. And found what? A pipeline. The Sinaloa cartel has been using those warehouses to move product north from Mexico. Drugs, weapons, even people. And they've got half the department on their payroll. Webb, 3 captains, at least a dozen officers. Her voice dropped. I copied the files to a secure drive. Webb must have found out. Jake sat back, processing. Where's the drive now? Hidden. Safety deposit box under my sister's name in Denver. Smart. He pulled out his phone, tapped something, then showed her a photo. Recognize him? The screen showed a man in his 50s, silver hair, expensive suit, standing outside what looked like a Mexican restaurant. His smile was warm, but his eyes were dead. Vicente Navarro, Sarah breathed. He owns half the commercial real estate in the county. Donates to police charities, sponsors Little League teams. He's also a lieutenant in the Sinaloa organization, Jake said flatly. Runs their Colorado operations. If Webb was working for someone, it was Navarro. How do you know this? Because before I retired, my team spent 2 years hunting cartel leadership in Mexico. Navarro was on our watch list. We never had enough to touch him. Jake's jaw tightened. Until now. The door opened. A woman in her early 50s entered Dr. Patricia Wells, according to her badge, followed by a younger man in a sheriff's uniform. Deputy Knowles from the lake. Lieutenant Chen, Dr. Wells said warmly. How are you feeling? Like I drowned and came back. That's fairly accurate. You were clinically hypothermic when you arrived. Another 10 minutes, and we'd be having a very different conversation. She checked Sarah's vitals, nodded with satisfaction. You're remarkably resilient. Deputy Knowles stepped forward awkwardly. Ma'am, I need to take your statement about what happened at the lake. Of course. Sarah glanced at Jake. This is Commander Morrison, Knowles interrupted. Yeah, we've met. Sheriff wants to talk to you too, sir, about the shooting. Self-defense, Jake said mildly. Defense of others, actually. Webb and his men were in the process of committing murder. That's how I saw it too, Knowles agreed. But protocol requires an MAFR interview. Later, Jake said, in a tone that wasn't a suggestion. Knowles bristled. Sir, I don't think you understand. I understand that 3 dirty cops just made bail and are probably planning their next move right now. I understand that Lieutenant Chen is a witness to a major corruption case, and someone just tried to kill her once already. Jake stood, and despite being only 2 inches taller than Knowles, he suddenly seemed to fill the room. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to post a deputy outside this door 24/7. Someone you trust, personally, not just someone from the roster. And then you're going to have your sheriff contact the FBI field office in Denver and request federal protection for a witness. I can't just deputy. Jake's voice went quiet, which somehow made it more menacing. I didn't survive 15 years of combat to watch a good cop get killed because local law enforcement couldn't get their act together. Make the calls. Now. Knowles looked at Sarah, who nodded weakly. The deputy left, muttering under his breath. Doctor. Wells had watched the exchange with interest. Commander Morrison, are you planning to appoint yourself Lieutenant Chen's personal bodyguard? Something like that. Then you should know she needs rest, real rest, at least 48 hours before she's mobile again. Understood. She'll have it. After the doctor left, Sarah turned to Jake. You can't just commandeer my life. Watch me. He moved to the window, scanning the parking lot below with professional paranoia. Someone with Navarro's resources won't stop because the first attempt failed. He'll try again, and soon. Right now, you're vulnerable, your dogs are vulnerable, and the evidence you collected is the only thing keeping all of you alive. So, what do you suggest? Jake turned back to her, and for the first time she saw something other than tactical efficiency in his eyes, a flicker of respect, maybe, or recognition. 1. warrior acknowledging another. "We go on offense," he said simply. "We get your evidence, we build an airtight case, and we take Navarro and his entire network down. Not just Webb and his dirty cops, the whole thing." "With what army?" "I'm one cop with 2 dogs. You're a K9 officer with 12 years of experience and 2 of the best-trained dogs in the state." Jake's smile was predatory. "And you've got a Navy SEAL who's been bored out of his mind for 6 months and really, really doesn't like people who hurt dogs." Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling. "You're insane. That's what they said when I volunteered for Team 6. He checked his watch. "I'm going to check on Atlas and Luna, make sure security in the vet ICU is adequate. Get some rest. When you're cleared to move, we're leaving." "Leaving where?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere we can plan." He was at the door when Sarah called out, "Commander Morrison?" He paused. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain. 3 years ago, my team was in Syria. We were hunting an ISIS cell that had been kidnapping aid workers. We found them in a compound outside Raqqa, along with 6 hostages they were planning to execute on camera. He turned to face her fully. "Hey, we went in hot, saved 5 of the 6. The 6th, she was a trauma surgeon from Doctors Without Borders, 28 years old. We were 30 seconds too late." His jaw worked. 30 seconds. I've carried that for 3 years. "So when I heard dogs barking in distress, when I saw you and them being thrown under that ice," he shook his head, "I'm not missing my window again. Not this time." Sarah felt something shift in her chest. What was her name? The surgeon. Dr. Maya Chen. The world seemed to stop. Chen? Was she your cousin? Probably. I looked you up after the lake. Maya listed a Sarah Chen, Colorado State Police, as her emergency contact. Jake's eyes were steady. "So yeah, I owe you, I owe her. And I'm not letting anyone finish what Webb started." He left before Sarah could respond, the door clicking shut behind him. Sarah lay back against the pillows, her mind reeling. Maya. Her brilliant, passionate cousin who'd given up a lucrative hospital position to treat refugees in war zones. Maya, who'd been killed by terrorists 18 months ago, whose body had been recovered by Special Operations Forces and sent home for burial. Maya, who Jake Morrison had tried to save. Outside her window, snow began to fall again, soft and silent. But Sarah didn't feel cold anymore. She felt something she hadn't felt since those hands pushed her into freezing water. She felt like she had a fighting chance. 2 floors below, Jake stood in the veterinary ICU, watching as Atlas and Luna slept in adjacent kennels, both dogs hooked to IVs and monitoring equipment. The Malinois' amber eyes opened when Jake approached, instantly alert, despite exhaustion. "Easy, Atlas," Jake murmured. "Just checking in." He'd spent 2 hours with the veterinarian, asking questions about recovery protocols, what signs to watch for, when the dogs could return to active duty. The vet had been impressed by his knowledge of working dogs, less so when she realized Jake was planning to take them back into potential danger. "These dogs need at least 2 weeks of rest," she'd said firmly. "They'll get it, after we finish what their handlers started." Now, standing in the quiet ICU with only the soft beep of monitors for company, Jake made a decision. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd sworn he wouldn't call again. It rang twice. "Morrison? Didn't expect to hear from you. Hey, Bishop. I need a favor." Lieutenant Commander Marcus Bishop Hayes, Jake's former team leader, sighed on the other end. "You've been retired 6 months. Already missing the life? Something came up. I need information on Vicente Navarro. Everything JSOC has on him." A pause. "That's classified intelligence, Jake. I can't just... A cop and her K9s almost died tonight because Navarro's got half the local police on his payroll. I'm not letting him skate because of red tape. This isn't our jurisdiction anymore. You're not active duty. Then consider it a consultation. You know I wouldn't call unless it was critical." Another pause, longer this time. "Finally, I'll see what I can do. But Jake, If you're planning what I think you're planning, be careful. These cartel guys don't play by rules. Neither do I, Jake said, and ended the call. He turned back to the dogs. Luna had woken now, too, her brown eyes fixed on him with that intense intelligence German shepherds were known for. Your handler's tough, Jake told them quietly, but she's going to need backup. Think you two are up for it? Atlas's tail thumped once against the kennel floor. Yeah, Jake said. That's what I thought. The next morning brought complications. Sarah woke to find Deputy Knowles and an FBI agent standing in her room. The agent, Special Agent Rachel Diaz, mid-40s, with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, wasted no time. Lieutenant Chen, I'm taking over this investigation. The evidence you collected constitutes a federal case, RICO statutes, drug trafficking across state lines, weapons charges. She pulled out a tablet, tapped it. I need you to tell me where the drive is located and provide authorization for us to access it. Where's Commander Morrison? Sarah asked instead. The SEAL? Diaz frowned. He's not law enforcement. This is FBI business now. He saved my life. And we're grateful, but this is bigger than one dirty captain. If Navarro really has corrupted significant portions of local law enforcement, we need a coordinated federal response, not a lone wolf playing hero. Sarah studied the agent. How long have you been investigating Navarro? That's classified. How long, Agent? Diaz? A beat. 14 months. We've been building a case, but he's careful. Everything's insulated, layers of legitimate business. The evidence you have could be the break we need. Then you'll need me and my K9s as witnesses. Eventually, yes. But right now, Navarro knows I'm alive, and he'll try again, Sarah interrupted. Webb made bail. So did his men. That means Navarro's already moving to clean up loose ends. How's your protection plan? Diaz's jaw tightened. We'll put you in protective custody, relocated to a secure facility until trial. For how long? Months? Years? Sarah shook her head. I'm not hiding. I'm finishing this. With all due respect, Lieutenant, you almost died. You're in no condition. I'm in perfect condition to bring down the men who tried to murder me. The door opened. Jake entered carrying 2 coffee cups and a bag that smelled like breakfast sandwiches. He stopped when he saw Diaz, his expression neutral. Commander Morrison, Diaz said coolly. We were just discussing how this investigation will proceed. Were you? Jake handed 1 coffee to Sarah, kept the other. And what did you decide? That Lieutenant Chen will cooperate with the FBI. You, however, are a civilian with no authority in this matter. Technically, I'm retired military with a top-secret clearance and 15 years of experience hunting people significantly more dangerous than Vicente Navarro. Jake's smile was pleasant and absolutely lethal. Also, I'm the one who pulled the lieutenant and her dogs from that frozen lake, so I've got a vested interest in keeping them alive. Your heroics are noted, but Agent Diaz, Sarah interrupted. With respect, the FBI has been investigating Navarro for over a year with no arrests. Commander Morrison identified him as cartel in less than 12 hours. Maybe instead of fighting about jurisdiction, we work together? Diaz looked between them, clearly calculating. Fine, but this operation runs through FBI channels. My rules, my chain of command. As long as your rules include keeping Lieutenant Chen alive, we won't have a problem, Jake said. After Diaz left with Deputy Knowles in tow, Sarah turned to Jake. That was diplomatic of you. I'm not the cowboy everyone thinks I am. He unpacked the breakfast sandwiches, egg, bacon, cheese on sourdough. Besides, having the FBI involved actually helps. They've got resources we don't. Resources for what? Exactly. Jake pulled out a tactical map and spread it across the hospital bed table. I did some reconnaissance last night. Navarro owns a compound 30 miles north of here, technically a guest ranch, but it's fortified like a military installation. High walls, electronic security, armed guards. That's where he runs his operations from. You're not seriously suggesting we assault it. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible true stories of courage and loyalty. No, I'm suggesting we get proof of what's happening inside, hand it to Diaz, and let the FBI get their warrant. He pointed to the map. But first, we need your evidence drive. Without that, everything else is just theory. It's in Denver. 3-hour drive. Which is 3 hours Navarro's people could intercept us. We need to move fast and smart. Jake checked his watch. Doc says you can be discharged this afternoon if you sign an AMA form. I'll have a vehicle ready. Atlas and Luna get released tomorrow morning. I've arranged for a private veterinary transport to meet us. Where? Safe House. My brother's ranch in western Colorado. Off the grid, defensible, and nobody knows about it except family. He met her eyes. But I need to know you're committed to this. Because once we start, Navarro will throw everything he has at us. Sarah thought about Maya. About Atlas and Luna who'd almost died protecting her. About the other cops who might be on Navarro's payroll doing his dirty work because they were too scared or corrupt to refuse. I'm in, she said. Let's end this. That afternoon, Sarah signed herself out of the hospital against medical advice, her body still aching but functional. Jake had arranged for clothing practical outdoor gear that fit surprisingly well. When she asked how he knew her size, he just shrugged. Observant. The vehicle was a black Chevy Tahoe with tinted windows. Probably a rental, but Jake had modified it with tactical additions, reinforced door panels, run-flat tires, a police scanner modified to pick up cartel frequencies. They left at dusk, timing it so they'd reach Denver after dark. Jake drove with the relaxed competence of someone who'd run countless high-risk operations, his eyes constantly checking mirrors. Sarah used the time to brief him more thoroughly on what she'd found. The evidence on that drive included financial records, shipping manifests, surveillance photos, and recorded conversations. It was comprehensive enough to not just take down Navarro, but his entire Colorado network. "How'd you get the recordings?" Jake asked. "Webb's office. I installed a bug 6 weeks ago when I started getting suspicious." She smiled grimly. "Illegal as hell, probably not admissible, but it led me to everything else. Good instincts." They were 40 miles from Denver when Jake's phone buzzed. He checked it, frowned, then pulled into a rest stop. "What's wrong?" Bishop came through with intel on Navarro. He pulled up a classified file on his phone. Vicente Navarro, 54. Formerly Eduardo Guzman from Sonora. Changed identity 12 years ago after his family was killed by a rival cartel. Built his Colorado operation from scratch, legitimate business fronts, community connections, the whole 9 yards. So he's smart, he's strategic, also ruthless. Bishop's files show at least 17 murders tied to his organization in the last 5 years. Witnesses, rivals, even his own people when they became liabilities. Jake looked at her seriously. "What I'm saying is, he won't stop, not until you're dead or he is." "Then I guess we'd better make sure. It's not me." They reached Denver at 9 p.m. The bank with Sarah's safety deposit box was in an affluent neighborhood, closed for the evening. Jake parked 2 blocks away and studied the building. "Security? Cameras, night guard, alarm system? But I have a key and authorization. Which means if Navarro's tracking you, he knows you'll come here eventually." Jake scanned the street. "We go in fast, get the drive, get out. 5 minutes max." "What if they're watching?" "They definitely are." He pulled a pair of night vision goggles from his bag, swept the area. 2 vehicles. Black sedan, 11 o'clock. Gray van, 2 o'clock, both occupied, engines running. Sarah's heart rate kicked up. "How do you want to play it?" "Diversion." He pulled out his phone, made a call. "Bishop, I need another favor. Remember that thing you taught me about triggering car alarms remotely?" A minute later, every car alarm on the block erupted simultaneously. The street transformed into chaos lights, flashing, sirens wailing. The sedan and van's occupants immediately focused on their own vehicles. "Now," Jake said. They moved quickly through the confusion, entering through the bank's side entrance. Sarah used her key on the after-hours access panel. The night guard, an elderly man named Walter, who'd known Sarah's father, looked up in surprise. "Sarah? What are you doing here?" "Emergency access, Walter. Won't take 5 minutes." He nodded slowly, then noticed Jake. "Who's your friend?" "Protection detail," Jake said, flashing a military ID that technically wasn't valid anymore but looked official enough. Walter let them pass. The vault room was quiet, temperature-controlled, lined with numbered boxes. Sarah found hers #3471 and used both keys to open it. Inside was a single thumb drive wrapped in a sealed evidence bag. "Got it," she breathed. That's when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing everything in red. Jake already had his weapon, drawn, moving to position himself between Sarah and the vault door. "They cut the power," he said quietly, coming in hard. From the front of the bank came the sound of glass shattering, shouts. Walter's voice raised in protest, then cut off abruptly. Jake handed Sarah a pistol, her own service weapon that he'd somehow retrieved. "Stay behind me. We're going out the emergency exit, Walter. If he's smart, he hit the floor. We can't help him if we're dead." They moved quickly through the maze of the bank's back offices. Behind them, flashlight beams swept the vault room. Voices called out in Spanish Navarro's men, not cops. The emergency exit was alarmed, but Jake kicked it open anyway, the shriek of the siren adding to the chaos. They emerged into an alley, running hard for the Tahoe. Gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets sparked off brick, shattered a window. Jake returned fire without breaking stride. 3 precise shots that dropped 2 pursuers. They reached the vehicle. Jake yanked open the driver's door. Sarah dove into the passenger seat. The engine roared to life, and they peeled out as more gunmen emerged from the bank. The Tahoe's rear window exploded. Sarah ducked low as Jake executed a J-turn, spinning the vehicle to face their pursuers. For a heartbeat, they were stationary, completely exposed. Jake floored the accelerator. The Tahoe surged forward, engine screaming. The gunmen scattered. One wasn't fast enough. The reinforced bumper caught him and sent him tumbling. "Exit strategy?" Sarah shouted over the chaos. "Highway. Lose them in traffic." Jake took a corner at 50, the Tahoe's suspension protesting. "Check the drive. Make sure it's real." Sarah pulled out a laptop she'd brought, plugged in the drive. Files loaded documents, audio, video. It was all there. "It's genuine," she confirmed. "Good. Now we just have to survive the next 30 miles. Behind them, headlights appeared. 2 vehicles this time, closing fast. Professional. The pursuit they were boxing the Tahoe in, trying to force them toward less populated areas. Jake saw it happening and made a split-second decision. Instead of heading for the highway, he turned toward downtown Denver, where traffic was heavier and police presence stronger. "Calling in cavalry," he said, grabbing his phone one-handed. He dialed Diaz's number. "This is Morrison. We have the evidence, and we're under fire. Denver, heading north on Broadway. Send everything you've got." Diaz's response was immediate and professional. "Units rolling. Stay on the line." The chase continued through downtown, a deadly game of cat and mouse at 60 miles per hour. Jake's driving was surgical. He knew exactly how to use traffic as cover, when to accelerate, when to brake. The Tahoe's modifications meant it handled better than it should, tires gripping pavement that should have sent them spinning. One of the pursuing vehicles pulled alongside, passenger window down. Sarah saw the barrel of an automatic weapon. "Gun!" she shouted. Jake hit the brakes. The pursuing car shot past them. Jake immediately accelerated again, ramming their rear quarter panel. The car spun out, crashing into a parked delivery truck. But the second vehicle was still coming, and ahead, a red light with crossing traffic. "Hold on," Jake said. He accelerated toward the intersection. At the last second, he cut the wheel hard right, sending the Tahoe into a controlled slide. They swept through the red light sideways, missing a semi by inches, then straightened out on the cross street. The pursuing vehicle tried to follow. Didn't make it. The semi clipped their front end, sending them into a violent spin that ended against a light pole. Jake kept driving. 2 blocks later, they met a wall of FBI vehicles screaming toward them, lights and sirens announcing federal authority. Jake pulled over. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Sarah started laughing, slightly hysterical, running on adrenaline and relief. That, she said breathlessly, was insane. That was Tuesday, Jake replied. You should see what I do when things get interesting. Agent Diaz arrived 10 minutes later, her expression a mix of anger and grudging respect. You two just led cartel gunmen on a chase through downtown Denver. They started it, Jake said mildly. We got the drive, Sarah added, holding it up. Everything you need to take down Navarro's operation. Diaz took the drive carefully, like it might explode. This better be worth it. It is, Sarah promised. But we need to move fast. Navarro knows we have it now. He'll be cleaning house, destroying evidence, maybe running. My team will handle it. With respect, Agent Diaz. Your team didn't stop him from almost killing me once already. Sarah's voice hardened. We finish this together, or I'll finish it alone. Diaz studied her for a long moment. You're not a federal agent, Lieutenant. No, but I'm a Colorado state cop with jurisdiction and a personal stake. She paused. And I have Commander Morrison, who's forgotten more about taking down bad guys than most of your agents will ever learn. Jake said nothing, just stood there, radiating quiet competence. Finally, Diaz nodded. Against my better judgment. You're in, but you follow my operation plan to the letter. Agreed, Sarah said. Good. Because we hit Navarro's compound tomorrow night, and we're bringing an army. The ranch house sat in a valley 40 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by pine forest and mountains that touched the sky. It belonged to Jake's older brother, Michael, a former Marine who'd bought the property with his discharge pay and built a life raising horses and being left alone by the world. Michael Morrison was broader than Jake, weathered by sun and work, with the same gray eyes but more laugh lines. He took one look at his younger brother standing on the porch with a banged-up cop and said, Kitchen, coffee, talk. An hour later, Michael was caught up. He looked at Sarah with respect. You've got guts, I'll give you that. Most people would have taken witness protection and run. I'm not most people. I can see that. He turned to Jake. You need the property for staging? Just for tonight. FBI's handling the actual operation tomorrow. But you'll be there anyway. Wouldn't miss it. Michael sighed. Mom's going to kill you if you get shot again. Hasn't happened yet. Third time's the charm. A vehicle pulled up outside the veterinary transport with Atlas and Luna. Sarah was out the door before the truck stopped moving, pulling open the back to find both dogs alert and responsive despite lingering fatigue. Atlas saw her, and the Malinois' tail started wagging so hard his whole back end moved. Luna barked once, joyful and relieved. Hey, my loves, Sarah whispered, running her hands over both dogs, checking them carefully. I'm here. I'm okay. The dogs pressed against her, and for the first time since the frozen lake, Sarah felt tears slide down her face. Not from sadness or fear, but from the overwhelming relief of having her partners back. Jake watched from the porch, understanding something fundamental in that moment. Sarah Chen wasn't just a cop with K9s. She was a handler with an unbreakable bond to the animals who'd almost died protecting her. They weren't tools or weapons to her, they were family. That night they gathered around Michael's dining table with maps and equipment spread across the surface. Agent Diaz had sent over the operational plan via secure link. A coordinated raid at 0300 hours, 3 teams hitting Navarro's compound from different angles. FBI hostage rescue team takes point. Jake read. Local SWAT in support. ATF handling any explosives. DEA securing evidence. Where do we fit? Sarah asked. Technically? We don't. He looked up. But they've assigned us to the perimeter team, backup and containment. That's political nonsense. We should be going in. Agreed. But we pick our battles. Jake pointed to the map. Navarro's compound has a panic room in the main house, reinforced steel, its own air supply. If he gets in there during the raid, he can hold out for hours. So, we make sure he doesn't get there. Exactly. Which means we don't wait for the official go signal. He traced a path on the map. There's a ravine on the west side, not guarded heavily because the terrain's rough. We go in 30 minutes early. Position ourselves between the main house and the panic room entrance. That's outside the operation plan. That's why it'll work. Sarah studied the map, then looked at Atlas and Luna sleeping in front of the fireplace. The dogs need more recovery time. They can ride in a vehicle until we're in position. Atlas is trained for protection and assault. He can handle close quarters work if needed. Luna stays back as rear guard. Michael, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. You know you're both crazy, right? Certifiably, Jake agreed. Good. Just making sure we're all clear on that. Michael stood. I've got some gear that might help. Body armor, night vision, extra magazines. Jake knows where it is. After Michael left to check on the horses, Sarah turned to Jake. Why are you really doing this? And don't say it's about Maya. That's part of it, but not all. Jake was quiet for a moment. 3 months ago, I mustered out of the Navy. 20 years of service, 15 in special operations. I thought I wanted peace, quiet, time to figure out who I am when I'm not breaching doors and hunting terrorists. He met her eyes. Turns out I'm still that guy, and when I heard those dogs barking, when I saw what Webb was trying to do, I realized something. What? That retirement doesn't mean giving up the fight. It just means choosing which battles matter. He gestured toward Atlas and Luna. This matters. You matter. And Navarro represents everything I spent 20 years fighting, against people who use power and violence to hurt innocents. Sarah felt something shift between them, a recognition of shared purpose deeper than strategy or tactics. Okay then, she said quietly. Let's go finish this. They spent the rest of the night preparing. Jake field-stripped and cleaned weapons, loaded magazines, checked equipment with the methodical precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Sarah worked with Atlas and Luna, running them through basic drills to assess their readiness. Atlas was slower than usual, favoring his left front paw slightly, but his focus was sharp. When Sarah gave the command to alert on a hidden object, the Malinois found it in under 30 seconds. Luna's search and rescue skills were undiminished. She tracked Sarah's scent trail across the property, even though it was hours old. They're ready, Sarah told Jake. Not at 100%, but ready. Good, because at 0200 tomorrow morning, we're going to hit Navarro's compound. And this time, nobody's walking away except us. The mountain air was thin and cold. At 0200 hours, the sky above Navarro's compound diamond bright with stars. Jake Morrison and Sarah Chen lay prone on a ridge overlooking the target, night vision goggles turning the world into shades of green. The compound sprawled across 20 acres main house, 3 guest houses, a stable, and multiple outbuildings. High walls topped with cameras and motion sensors. At least a dozen armed guards visible, probably more Jake couldn't see. You weren't kidding about the security, Sarah whispered. Navarro didn't build an empire by being careless. Jake checked his watch. FBI moves in 28 minutes. We need to be in position before then. Behind them, Atlas waited silently in tactical gear, a K9 vest with armored plates and a camera mount that transmitted to Jake's phone. Luna stayed with the vehicle they'd hidden half a mile back, her role as rear security critical if they needed to extract, fast. They moved down the ravine that formed the western approach. The terrain was treacherous, loose rocks, thorny scrub, steep inclines that required careful foot placement. Atlas navigated it better than either human, his superior balance and night vision making it look easy. 15 minutes brought them to the compound's western wall. Here the security was lighter because the approach was so difficult. One guard walked a patrol route, but his timing was predictable. Jake signaled Atlas. The Malinois moved forward like a shadow, positioning himself behind a boulder. When the guard passed, Jake stepped out and took him down with a sleeper hold, not lethal, but the man would be unconscious for 20 minutes minimum. They zip-tied him and continued forward. The gap in the wall was exactly where Jake's reconnaissance had indicated a service entrance for deliveries, locked but not alarmed. Jake picked it in 40 seconds while Sarah kept watch. Inside the compound, things got more complicated. The main house's lights were on despite the late hour. Through windows, they could see men moving, some carrying weapons, others packing boxes. Navarro was preparing for something. "He knows we're coming," Sarah whispered. "Probably. But he doesn't know we're already here." Jake pointed to a separate structure connected to the main house by a covered walkway. "Panic room entrance is in that building. We set up there, wait for the raid to start, then block his escape route." They moved through shadows and blind spots, Atlas providing early warning every time someone approached. The K9s' hearing picked up footsteps long before human ears could, giving them time to hide or adjust course. They were 50 feet from the target building when Atlas froze, his body going rigid. Jake immediately dropped to a knee, weapon raised. A figure emerged from the building, tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit despite the hour. Vicente Navarro himself, flanked by 2 bodyguards. "He's running now," Jake breathed. "Before the raid even starts." Sarah felt rage rise in her throat. This was the man who'd ordered her death, who'd corrupted good cops, who'd brought cartel violence into Colorado. And he was about to slip away. "We can't let him reach that panic room," she said. "We won't." Jake raised his rifle, but the angle was wrong. Too many walls, too much cover. Navarro was moving quickly toward the panic room entrance, his bodyguards scanning for threats. "Atlas," Sarah commanded softly. "Target front. Take down." The Malinois understood instantly. He shot forward like a missile, covering the distance in seconds. The first bodyguard saw him too late. 85 pounds of Belgian Malinois hit him chest high, teeth finding the meat of his arm before he could raise his weapon. The second bodyguard spun, bringing up an MP5 submachine gun. Jake dropped him with a single shot before he could fire. Navarro froze, his face pale with shock. For a man who'd ordered deaths without hesitation, facing his own mortality clearly wasn't something he'd prepared for. Jake and Sarah emerged from cover, weapons trained on him. "Vicente Navarro," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Colorado State Police, you're under arrest." Navarro's shock transformed into cold calculation. "You have no authority here. No warrant, no backup, just 2 people with guns trespassing on private property." "Actually," came Agent Diaz's voice from behind them, "we've got plenty of authority." FBI agents poured into the compound from 3 directions. The raid Jake knew was coming, arriving right on schedule. Flashbangs detonated, turning night to day. Shouts of "FBI! On the ground!" echoed across the property. Navarro's security team tried to resist. The firefight was brief and one-sided. Cartel thugs against FBI hostage rescue, SWAT, and ATF operators. It lasted maybe 90 seconds before the shooting stopped and the arrests began. Jake kept his weapon on Navarro throughout. "On your knees, hands behind your head." For a moment, the cartel lieutenant considered resisting. Then he saw Atlas, still holding the first bodyguard down with teeth bared, and thought better of it. He knelt. Sarah pulled out handcuffs, not FBI equipment, her own duty cuffs, and secured Navarro's wrists behind his back. "Vicente Navarro, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, drug trafficking, and about 40 other charges I'll let the federal prosecutor explain." Agent Diaz approached, her expression carefully neutral. "That was fast work, Lieutenant, Commander. Almost like you got here before the official breach." "Must have been excellent timing," Jake said blandly. Diaz's lips twitched toward a smile. "Right. Excellent timing." She gestured to her team. "Take him. Priority 1 custody, federal holding facility." As agents led Navarro away, the cartel boss looked back at Sarah. "This isn't over. I have lawyers, connections. You think this stops? Anything? Actually, yeah. Sarah held up her phone, showing the evidence drive's files displayed on screen. We have 14 months of financial records, recorded conversations, surveillance footage. We have Captain Webb's testimony, he rolled on you, the second FBI offered a deal. And we have 3 corrupted law enforcement officers who'll spend the next 20 years explaining exactly how you bought them. For the first time, Navarro's facade cracked. His face went pale. So no, Sarah continued, this isn't the beginning of a legal battle. This is the end of your empire. She nodded to the agents. Take him away. The raid continued for another 3 hours. FBI teams swept every building, finding enough evidence to secure warrants for 50 additional arrests. The scope of Navarro's operation was staggering. He'd been moving product through Colorado for 12 years, building a network that touched 5 states. By dawn, the compound was a crime scene crawling with federal agents. Jake and Sarah stood outside the walls, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Atlas lay at Sarah's feet, exhausted but satisfied. The veterinary team had checked him and cleared him for light duty, no permanent damage from the confrontation. Hell of a night, Jake said quietly. Hell of a week, Sarah corrected. I got thrown in a frozen lake, nearly died, chased through Denver, and just helped bring down a cartel lieutenant. So, good week? She laughed, surprised to find humor in any of it. Actually, yeah, good week. Agent Diaz approached, holding 2 cups of coffee. Figured you 2 could use this. You figured right, Sarah said, accepting gratefully. We recovered enough evidence to prosecute Navarro and 73 members of his organization, Diaz said. Plus, your testimony about Captain Webb and the attempted murder will add decades to the charges. Colorado's major cartel pipeline just got shut down hard. What happens now? Jake asked. Now? The U.S. Attorney's office files charges, we begin prosecution, and about 6 months from now, you'll be testifying in federal court. Diaz looked at Sarah. You'll probably have to take leave from the department while Internal Affairs investigates how deep the corruption went. Sarah nodded. She'd expected that. What about Webb and his men? Already charged. Federal conspiracy to commit murder of a law enforcement officer. They're looking at life without parole. Diaz paused. For what it's worth, Lieutenant. You did good work. Dangerous, occasionally reckless, definitely outside proper procedure. But good. Thanks. I think. After Diaz left to coordinate with other agencies, Jake turned to Sarah. So what now? You'll have time off. Your dogs need continued recovery. What's the plan? Sarah looked down at Atlas, who'd saved her life more times than she could count. Then back at Jake, the seal who'd heard barking in a blizzard and refused to let her drown. Honestly, I have no idea. For the first time in 12 years, my schedule isn't dictated by cases or duty assignments. She smiled. It's weird. Weird can be good. Maybe. She met his eyes. What about you? Back to retirement at the cabin? Jake was quiet for a moment. You know, I thought that's what I wanted. Peace and quiet. Time to decompress from 20 years of war. He gestured at the compound, the agents, the evidence of what they'd accomplished. But this week reminded me that some people aren't built for retirement. Some people need a mission. And what's your mission now? Still figuring that out. He paused. Though I've been thinking, there are probably other cops out there in situations like yours. Good people fighting corruption, outgunned, needing help that official channels can't provide. Sarah understood immediately where he was going. You want to start a private security firm, more like specialized support services, for law enforcement officers facing situations beyond normal department resources. His expression was thoughtful. I've got skills, contacts, resources. Seems a shame to waste them. That's ambitious. So was taking down Navarro's entire operation with 1 cop, 2 K9s, and a retired SEAL. She couldn't argue with that logic. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in the parking lot of Colorado State Police headquarters, watching as Captain Webb was led out in handcuffs to be transferred to federal custody. His eyes found hers for a moment, hatred, resentment, and something that might have been shame flickering across his face. She felt nothing, no satisfaction, no anger. Just the quiet certainty that justice had been served. Inside, the department was in chaos. 7 officers had been arrested, another dozen suspended pending investigation. The governor had appointed a special prosecutor. Internal Affairs was investigating every case the corrupted officers had touched. Sarah's own status was complicated. She was a hero to some, the cop who'd exposed the corruption. To others, she was the troublemaker who destroyed careers and thrown the department into turmoil. She didn't care about either label. Atlas and Luna were in the vehicle, both dogs now fully recovered from their ordeal. The department had offered Sarah a promotion, a transfer to a new unit, a fresh start. She'd turned it all down. Instead, she'd submitted her resignation. Effective in 30 days, she'd be leaving the Colorado State Police after 12 years of service. Jake pulled up in his truck, leaning out the window. "You sure about this?" "Completely." She climbed in, the dog settling in the back seat. "Morrison Security Solutions needs a K9 specialist, right?" "It does. Though technically, the company doesn't exist yet." "Then we should probably work on that." They drove out of the parking lot, leaving headquarters behind. The future was uncertain. Building a business, establishing legitimacy, finding clients who needed their particular combination of skills. It would be difficult. But they'd faced worse. As they headed toward the mountains, Sarah looked back at Atlas and Luna. The dogs were alert, watching the world pass by, ready for whatever came next. Sometimes God sends his angels in unexpected forms. Not always with wings or halos, but with loyalty that won't quit, courage that won't break, and love that survives frozen lakes and cartel bullets. Atlas and Luna had taught Sarah that lesson in the most profound way possible. They'd refused to let her die, even when death would have been easier than fighting. And Jake Morrison had heard their barking across 3 miles of blizzard because some part of him, the warrior part that never truly retires, recognized a distress call he couldn't ignore. Together, they'd proven that evil doesn't win when good people refuse to surrender. That corruption can be exposed. That justice, though sometimes delayed, eventually comes. The road stretched ahead, morning sunlight painting the mountains gold. Somewhere out there, other people needed help, other officers facing impossible odds, other K9s protecting their partners against overwhelming danger. And now, those people had somewhere to turn. Sarah reached back to scratch Atlas's head, the Malinois leaning into her touch with absolute trust. Luna pressed her nose against Sarah's hand, tail wagging. "You two ready for the next mission?" Sarah asked quietly. Both dogs' tails thumped against the seat. Jake smiled, adjusting the rearview mirror to watch them. "I'll take that as a yes," he said. The truck crested a ridge, the vast expanse of Colorado opening before them. Snow-capped peaks touched the horizon, rivers wound through valleys. The world felt clean, new, full of possibility. Behind them lay the frozen lake that had tried to claim 3 lives. Behind them lay corruption exposed and justice served. Behind them lay everything that had tried to kill them. Ahead lay something better. The wind screamed across Mirror Lake, like something alive and furious, carrying sheets of snow that turned the world into a white void. The temperature had plummeted to 15 below zero, the kind of cold that burned exposed skin in seconds and turned breath to ice crystals before they hit the ground. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, 34, couldn't feel her hands anymore. The zip ties bit deep into her wrists, cutting off circulation, while her 2 K9 partners Atlas, an 85-pound Belgian Malinois, and Luna, a 75-pound German Shepherd, struggled beside her in the back of the van. Both dogs were muzzled and bound, their frightened whimpers cutting through Sarah's heart worse than the cold ever could. She'd been a Colorado State Police officer for 12 years, the last 6 with the K9 unit. Atlas specialized in explosive detection and tactical assault. Luna was trained for search and rescue, her nose capable of finding victims buried under 10 feet of avalanche snow. Together, the three of them had saved 47 lives. Now someone wanted to make sure they'd never save another. The van lurched to a stop. Sarah's head cracked against the metal wall, stars exploding across her vision. Through the gap in the partition, she caught a glimpse of the frozen lake stretching endlessly into the storm. "End of the line, Lieutenant," came a voice she recognized with sickening clarity. Captain Marcus Webb stepped into view. 52 years old, decorated officer, mentor to half the department. The man who'd pinned her badge on 6 years ago. His face showed no emotion as he yanked open the van's rear doors, letting the brutal wind sweep inside. "You shouldn't have looked at those files, Sarah," he said almost sadly. "The cartel pays better than the state ever will. You could have just minded your business." Sarah's lips were too numb to form words, but her eyes burned with defiance. Atlas growled deep in his chest despite the muzzle, his amber eyes locked on Webb with pure hatred. Webb gestured to two men, in tactical gear. Dirty cops, Sarah realized, recognizing the patches. Officers she'd worked alongside, men she'd trusted with her life. "Get them on the ice," Webb ordered. "Make it look like they fell through during a rescue attempt. Happens all the time in weather like this." Strong hands dragged Sarah from the van. Her legs wouldn't support her weight. Hypothermia was setting in, her body shutting down systems to preserve her core temperature. Atlas and Luna were hauled out next, the dogs thrashing wildly despite their restraints. The surface of Mirror Lake stretched before them, a gray-white expanse broken by patches of darker ice where the water beneath was too restless to freeze completely. Death traps waiting to swallow anything that ventured over them. They dragged Sarah 50 yards onto the ice. She could hear it groaning beneath them, a deep, resonant sound like the lake itself was protesting. Atlas and Luna were forced down beside her, all three positioned over one of the darker patches. Webb crouched in front of Sarah, his breath fogging the air. "Nothing personal, Lieutenant. Just business." He stood, nodded to his men. They raised their weapons not to shoot, but to use as clubs. The first blow shattered the ice beside Sarah's head. The second opened a crack that spider-webbed outward. The third broke through completely. Black water surged up through the hole, impossibly cold, filled with chunks of ice like broken teeth. The men worked methodically, enlarging the opening until it was wide enough to swallow all three of them. "Any last words?" Webb asked. Sarah found her voice, hoarse and cracking. "Yeah, you're going to burn in hell." Webb smiled coldly. "Maybe, but not today." He nodded. His men kicked Sarah into the hole. She plunged into water so cold it felt like acid, every nerve in her body screaming. The shock forced what little air she had from her lungs. She sank, the darkness absolute, the cold crushing. Above her, she heard the muffled splashes as Atlas and Luna were thrown in after her. The zip ties made it impossible to swim. Sarah twisted desperately, trying to find the hole, but the current under the ice was deceptive. The water pulled her sideways, away from the opening. Her lungs burned, her vision started to go gray at the edges. "This is how I die," she thought with strange clarity. "Drowned under ice by men I trusted." Then something grabbed her jacket. Strong jaws pulling with desperate strength. Luna. The German Shepherd's search and rescue training had taught her to grab and drag, even in water, even bound and muzzled. Some instincts ran too deep to suppress. Luna pulled Sarah back toward the faint patch of lighter darkness that marked the hole. Sarah's head broke the surface, and she gasped, sucking in air that hurt like knives. But the men were still there, standing over the hole. "Persistent," Webb said. He raised his boot to push her back under. The gunshot cracked across the frozen lake like the hand of God. Webb stumbled backward, a red bloom spreading across his shoulder. His men scattered, diving for cover, weapons raised. "Who the hell?" one of them started to shout. Another shot, this one so precise it took the gun from the man's hand without touching his fingers. Through the swirling snow, a figure emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the controlled economy of a man who'd spent years perfecting the art of lethal efficiency. He wore Arctic camo and carried a rifle that looked like an extension of his body. Commander Jake "Reaper" Morrison, Navy SEAL Team 6, had been on leave at his family's cabin 3 miles up the mountain when he'd heard something that shouldn't exist in a blizzard: dogs barking in distress, the sound carrying on the wind in a pattern that triggered every combat instinct he'd honed over 15 years of operations. He'd grabbed his gear and moved toward the sound, arriving at the lake just in time to see 3 figures pushed through the ice. Now, he advanced across the frozen surface with controlled aggression, his weapon tracking targets with mechanical precision. "Federal officer," he barked, the lie coming smooth and automatic. "On the ground, now." Webb's remaining men hesitated. Jake put a round through the ice 6 inches from the nearest one's foot. "I don't miss twice," Jake said quietly. They dropped their weapons and hit the ice face first. Jake didn't waste time securing them. He sprinted to the hole where Sarah was clinging to the edge, her lips blue, eyes glazed with hypothermia. Luna was beside her, paddling weakly. Atlas surfaced a moment later, the Malinois' strength nearly spent. "Hold on," Jake said, dropping to his belly to distribute his weight. He reached into the water, grabbing Sarah's jacket. The cold bit into his hands, even through gloves. He pulled, muscles straining, dragging her onto solid ice. She wasn't breathing. Jake rolled her onto her back, checked her airway, and started CPR. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. The wind howled around them like it wanted to steal whatever warmth he was trying to restore. "Come on," he muttered between compressions. "Don't you quit on me." Sarah's chest hitched. She coughed, water spilling from her mouth, then sucked in a desperate breath. "That's it," Jake said. "Stay with me." He turned his attention to the dogs. Luna had crawled partially onto the ice, but Atlas was still in the water, his head barely above the surface. Jake reached in, grabbed the dog's tactical harness, and hauled the 85 pounds of muscle and determination onto the ice. Both K9s were shaking violently, hypothermia setting in fast. Jake pulled out his emergency thermal blankets, wrapping Sarah first, then the dogs. He cut their restraints with his combat knife, the blade slicing through zip ties and muzzles like they were paper. Atlas immediately tried to stand, positioning himself between Jake and Sarah despite his exhaustion. Luna pressed against Sarah's side, trying to share what little body heat she had left. "Easy, boy," Jake said softly to Atlas. "I'm one of the good guys." The Malinois' growl said he'd reserve judgment on that. Behind them, Webb was crawling across the ice, leaving a blood trail, reaching for a weapon one of his men had dropped. Jake didn't even look back. He simply drew his sidearm and put a round through the ice 3 inches from Webb's hand. "Next one won't miss," Jake said calmly. Webb froze. Jake activated his emergency beacon, the signal strong enough to reach the county sheriff's station 15 miles away. Then he gathered Sarah in his arms. She was a small woman, maybe 5 to 6, 130 pounds soaking wet, and started the careful journey back to shore. "Atlas, Luna," he said firmly, "heel." The dogs responded to the command voice instinctively, falling into step beside him despite their exhaustion. Jake moved steadily, testing each step, redistributing weight when he felt the ice flex beneath him. It took 20 minutes to reach the shore. By then, Sarah was semi-conscious, mumbling incoherently about files and cartels and men she'd trusted. Jake carried her to his truck, cranked the heat to maximum, and positioned her and the dogs in front of the vents. Only then did he go back for Webb and his men, securing them with their own zip ties and dragging them away from the hole in the ice. Let them freeze a little. They'd earned it. The first sheriff's cruiser arrived 30 minutes later, lights cutting through the storm. Jake stood beside his truck, rifle across his chest, looking every inch the warrior he was. Deputy Frank Knowles stepped out, hand on his sidearm, taking in the scene with wide eyes. "What the hell happened here?" "That woman in my truck is Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Colorado State Police," Jake said. "Those men tried to murder her and her K9s by throwing them through the ice. I happened to be in the area." "Happened to be," Frank repeated, skeptically. Jake's smile held no warmth. God works in mysterious ways, Deputy. I suggest you call your sheriff and tell him he's got dirty cops to deal with. Also call an ambulance. The lieutenant and her dogs need immediate medical attention. Frank looked at the bound men, at Webb bleeding into the snow, then back at Jake. Who the hell are you? Nobody important, Jake said. Just a SEAL who heard barking. In the truck, Sarah's eyes fluttered open. Through the fogged window, she saw a silhouette against the storm, broad-shouldered, still, watchful. Atlas and Luna were pressed against her, their warmth slowly bringing feeling back to her frozen limbs. She didn't know who he was, not yet. But somewhere in the haze of hypothermia and shock, she understood one absolute truth. That man had just declared war on whoever wanted her dead. And she had a feeling they were going to regret ever throwing her into that frozen lake. The storm raged on, but inside the truck, life was returning. 3 heartbeats that should have stopped were still beating, and in the darkness, a SEAL stood guard, waiting for the next move in a game that had just turned very, very deadly. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. Sarah opened her eyes to find Jake sitting in the corner chair, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. Atlas and Luna were curled on blankets beside her bed, both dogs wrapped in warming bandages, but alive and alert. You stayed, Sarah whispered, her voice raw. Someone had to make sure you didn't do anything stupid like discharge yourself early, Jake replied with a faint smile. How long? 18 hours. You had severe hypothermia, mild frostbite on 3 fingers, and your core temperature was dangerously low. The doctors said another 5 minutes in that water. He didn't finish the sentence. Sarah reached down to touch Atlas's head. The Malinois immediately pressed into her palm, tail wagging weakly. Luna lifted her head and whined softly, the sound full of relief. They saved my life, Sarah said. Luna pulled me back to the hole. Atlas tried to fight, even with his muzzle on. They're warriors, like you. Jake leaned forward. The FBI is investigating Webb's operation. Turns out he wasn't just taking cartel money, he was actively facilitating drug shipments through Colorado. You were getting too close to evidence that would have exposed the entire network. How many others? At least 7 officers on the cartel payroll, maybe more. Jake's expression hardened. Webb made bail this morning, posted by an anonymous third party. Sarah's blood ran cold. He's going to run, or come after you to finish the job. Which is why you're not going anywhere without protection. Jake pulled out his phone, showing her a photo. Recognize this man? The screen displayed a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit, silver hair perfectly styled. Vicente Navarro. He owns half the county. He also runs the Sinaloa cartel's Colorado operations. Webb works for him. Jake's voice was flat, professional. And Navarro doesn't leave loose ends. Sarah processed this, her mind already calculating angles. What do you want to do about it? Me? I'm retired military. Technically, I have no authority here. Jake's smile was cold, but I know how to hunt bad men. And I'm very good at it. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm volunteering. He stood, moving to the window to check the parking lot below. Your cousin Maya sent me a letter before she died. Said if anything happened to her, I should find her family. Tell them she loved them. I never got the chance. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Maya was my hero. She saved lives in war zones while I just wrote tickets and investigated burglaries. You exposed corruption that could have killed dozens of people. You're more like her than you think. Jake turned back to face her. Webb and Navarro took something from both of us. I say we. Take everything from them. Atlas barked once, sharp and certain. Luna's tail thumped against the floor. Sarah looked at her K9 partners, then at the SEAL who'd heard their barking across 3 miles of blizzard. A team was forming, unexpected, unconventional, but maybe exactly what was needed. Okay, she said quietly. Let's hunt. Webb's safe house was supposed to be secret, a remote cabin 40 miles north where dirty cops could lay low when things got hot. But Jake had sources from his Team 6 days who could find anyone, anywhere. They moved at dawn, Jake driving a blacked-out SUV with Sarah in the passenger seat. Atlas and Luna rode in back, both dogs wearing tactical vests with cameras that fed to monitors in the vehicle. "Rules of engagement?" Sarah asked as they approached. "We're not military, and you're technically on medical leave, so we observe and report." Jake's tone made it clear he wasn't entirely committed to that plan. Unless things go sideways. "And if they do?" He checked his sidearm. "Then we adapt." The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by pine forest, one vehicle parked outside. Through binoculars, Jake spotted two men on the porch, Webb's accomplices from the lake. No sign of Webb himself. "He's either inside or already ran," Sarah murmured. Jake released Atlas from the vehicle. "Atlas, search." The Malinois moved through the forest like smoke, circling the cabin's perimeter. His camera feed showed a third man stationed at the back door and movement through a rear window. Webb packing a duffel bag with cash. "He's running," Jake confirmed. "We move now or lose him." They approached in tandem, Jake taking point with Sarah covering. When they were 50 feet out, Webb emerged from the cabin, duffel in hand. He froze when he saw them. "Sarah, Commander Morrison." Webb's hand moved toward his waistband. "You're making a mistake." "The mistake was yours," Sarah said coldly. "When you threw me and my dogs into that lake." "Cartel. Orders. Nothing personal. Everything about this is personal." Webb drew his weapon. Jake was faster, putting a round through Webb's shoulder before the corrupt captain could aim. Webb went down hard, the duffel spilling cash across the dirt. The two men on the porch rushed forward. Atlas intercepted one, taking him down with practiced efficiency. Luna, released by Sarah's command, cornered the second man against the cabin wall, teeth bared in warning. The man at the back door tried to flee into the forest. Jake was on him in seconds, a textbook takedown that left the man zip-tied and cursing. By the time county sheriffs arrived, called by Jake's anonymous tip, 3 corrupt officers were in custody and Webb was on his way to the hospital, this time under federal guard. Agent Rachel Diaz, FBI, arrived an hour later. She surveyed the scene with a mixture of frustration and respect. "You two are either the bravest or dumbest people I've ever met," she said. "This was federal jurisdiction." "You're welcome," Jake replied mildly. Diaz pulled Sarah aside. "The evidence we recovered from Webb's cabin links directly to Navarro. Financial records, communication logs, everything we need for RICO charges. We're hitting Navarro's compound tonight." "I want to be there," Sarah said immediately. "You're not cleared for, he tried to kill me. I'm cleared for whatever I say I'm cleared for." Diaz studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Tactical support only. You and Morrison stay on the perimeter with your K9s. If Navarro runs, you intercept. Deal?" "Deal." The raid on Navarro's compound was surgical and overwhelming. FBI hostage rescue breached from 3 sides while SWAT established containment. Helicopter spotlights turned night into day. Jake, Sarah, Atlas, and Luna were positioned on the western ridge, watching for runners. They didn't have to wait long. Navarro emerged from a back exit with 2 bodyguards, moving toward a hidden vehicle. Atlas detected them first, his low growl alerting everyone. "Target moving, west exit," Jake reported over radio. "Intercept authorized," came Diaz's response. Jake and Sarah moved in tandem, years of training his military, hers law enforcement meshing perfectly. Atlas went high, taking down the first bodyguard. Luna flanked, cutting off escape routes. Navarro turned to run and found himself facing Jake Morrison at point-blank range. "On the ground," Jake said quietly. "Now." The cartel lieutenant looked at the seal, at the dogs, at Sarah approaching with handcuffs. He saw his empire crumbling around him and slowly, carefully, knelt in the dirt. Sarah cuffed him personally. "Vicente Navarro, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent." As she read him his rights, Atlas and Luna sat at attention on either side, 2 K9 warriors who'd survived a frozen lake and brought down a cartel. 3 months later, Sarah stood outside the courthouse where Navarro's trial had just concluded. Guilty on all counts. Life without parole. Webb and his accomplices had already been sentenced. The corruption investigation had cleaned out a dozen more dirty cops. Colorado's Sinaloa pipeline was finished. Jake leaned against his truck, Atlas and Luna in the bed, both dogs wearing Medal of Valor ribbons from the state police ceremony held in their honor. "So what now?" he asked Sarah. She looked at her former badge, which she'd officially turned in that morning. Then at the business card in her other hand, Morrison Security Solutions executive partner Sarah Chen. "Now?" She smiled. "We find the next fight worth having." Jake grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." They loaded into the truck 2 warriors and 2 K9s who'd proven that loyalty, courage, and refusal to surrender could overcome any darkness. Sometimes God sends his angels in unexpected forms, with fur and fangs, with rifles and resolve, with hearts that hear distress calls across miles of blizzard. Atlas and Luna had refused to let their handler drown. Jake Morrison had refused to ignore the sound of dogs who needed help. Together, they'd proven evil doesn't win when the righteous refuse to quit. The truck rolled out of the parking lot, heading toward mountains where the next mission waited. Because justice isn't about the badge you wear, it's about the stand you take when good people need protection. And somewhere out there, someone was calling for help. They'd be ready. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs reminding that heroes walk among us, that loyalty is real, that even when ice breaks beneath us and darkness pulls us down, there's always hope if we refuse to surrender. Subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, and the warriors, both human and K9, who protect those who cannot protect themselves. God bless, and see you in the next story.